What's going on, everybody? Good Mike War Commentaries back at you with another edition of The One-Off. And man, 2019's off to a great start, isn't it? Very, very sad news to report today. Mean Gene Okerlund has passed away at age 76. This one is gut-wrenching. This is a very tough pill to swallow for a lot of wrestling fans, especially old-school wrestling fans like myself. Mean Gene Okerlund was such a big part of wrestling's biggest time periods, in the 80s and their second boom in the 90s. And he was just a legendary figure in wrestling, with his announcing and his interviews and everything he did for so many different promotions. When you think of like a Mount Rushmore for wrestling that involves non-wrestlers, Mean Gene Okerlund's face needs to be carved first. He has so many legendary moments and was a part of so many legendary moments in the business that there's too many to even count. He was one of the voices of WWE, in my opinion, along with Howard Finkel, who is definitely easily the greatest ring announcer of all time. Mean Gene Okerlund, I kind of put him and Howard in the same boat, even though Gene bounced around a little bit and worked for several different promotions. Gene's, influence and Gene's personality and the presence that Gene Okerlund had in wrestling was unmatched. He was a part of everything, and he was the go-to guy for so many promotions. I remember Mean Gene when he still had hair. First time I ever saw him was in the AWA when I was a kid. And of course, he would follow Hulk Hogan and come to the WWF in around 1984. And he would spend 9 years there before leaving and going to WCW and being a part of their company during the Monday Night Wars. I mean, Mean Gene Okerlund was so involved in professional wrestling that I dare say people that aren't wrestling fans have probably heard the name Mean Gene Okerlund before, or maybe have seen him on TV back in the day, or, a time or two when they were flipping channels or whatever. I mean, Mean Gene was that recognizable, I believe, in wrestling. And this is a very sad death to hear about. Now, unlike so many wrestling deaths, I'm not going to really categorize this one as any sort of a horrible tragedy. Gene was not one of these situations where he died young or died of a drug overdose or so many other problems and black eyes that we have in the business, especially with deaths. I definitely don't put Mean Gene Okerlund in this category. He lived a long and happy life. And considering how much fun Mean Gene had in his life, and the drinking that he did, 76 is a pretty good age to make it to, because Gene did not play any games, and he had his fun, and he did his fair share of partying. And he always reminded me a lot of relatives of mine. Mean Gene's a Midwestern guy. I believe he was born in South Dakota. And whenever I would just watch Mean Gene talk, or, just see him in a different type of setting, maybe if he's sitting around a table having a drink. Years ago, when WWE had that WWE 24 channel on cable, and they would do those little round table specials, and Gene would moderate those, and he would always have a cocktail with him. The work that he did on Legends House when the WWE Network first launched. Every time I see Mean Gene Okerlund in those type of environments, he reminds me a lot of uncles that I have. Just that Midwestern type of attitude. They all drink, they all play cards, they're all perverted, dirty old men. Remember on Legends House when that hot chick would come over and kind of organize the guys and coordinate them for whatever they have planned for them that day? Mean Gene loved that girl. I can't remember what her name is. But just watching, Mean Gene around young women was always pretty funny. And he was just beloved by so many people. And he had so much on-screen chemistry with so many of those people and so many of his peers as well. Think of the chemistry he had with guys like Bobby the Brain Heenan, and even Gorilla Monsoon. I would like to think that the three of them are all having cocktails right now playing cards. I take comfort in knowing that that's probably happening. But Mean Gene Okerlund, man, he was a character. He was one of a kind, and such a hilarious guy. And his comedic timing and his wit and his ability to really guide guys through promos, especially back in the day, because, if you're a young fan, I'm going to drop a bombshell on you right here. Promo classes used to never exist. There was no such thing. They would stick a microphone in front of you on live TV, even if you have never cut a promo before. And a lot of times, Mean Gene, was the guy holding the mic, and he was the guy trying to keep these wrestlers on track. And he was a part of some pretty hilarious and pretty famous interviews, whether it be in the ring, backstage. He's been involved in some very, very big history-making moments, and he's also been involved in some very funny ones. There's some pretty famous promos that I'm sure you can find on YouTube with Mean Gene Okerlund and guys like Ken Patera. I know the Ken Patera interview is one of my favorites. Dr. D. David Schultz, Don Morocco, Fuji, like I said, Savage, The Ultimate Warrior, so many different types of wrestlers that he had to work with and be there and guide through an interview made for some of the most entertaining moments in wrestling history, especially with all of the comedy and how well he could just, come up with things. He was very Bobby Heenan-like, especially if he was, interviewing somebody. He was also very fearless. I never saw Mean Gene Okerlund, not once, even if he was standing next to Andre the Giant. I never saw him fearful of anyone. And he would have no problem calling people out. He would have no problem poking fun or making fun of them. He would have no problem stirring up the shit between two guys like he did to Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect at King of the Ring. And he would also have no problem telling people that he didn't like them. I remember the night that Hogan joined the NWO, and Mean Gene is like, "You fucking piece of shit, I can't believe you did this." He certainly wasn't a pussy. He was fearless. He was brutally honest and unapologetic about anything that he ever said, especially in real life and in business. Think about it. Mean Gene Okerlund left the AWA pretty much in the middle of the night to go work for Vince in the WWF for the big money. A few years later, in 1993, he would leave Vince for WCW for more money. There were some issues with WWE at the time. I'm not sure if he was even offered a new contract, but even if he was, I'm sure WCW could have paid him more, and he probably would have jumped over there anyway. And Mean Gene is the guy that I credit with starting everything. A lot of people have twisted history with WCW. They think of it as Hogan going there first and then everybody following Hogan. Really wasn't like that. Mean Gene went there first, and everybody followed Mean Gene. Once Gene got there, a couple of months later, Bobby Heenan showed up, and then a few months after that, in the summer of '94, was when they signed Hulk Hogan. So, Gene was the one guy, the one big name in the business that when he left WWE, a guy that was really widely considered the face of the WWE, and then he turns up in WCW, that to me is when I started noticing there being a change. Because if WCW is luring away one of the voices of WWE, that's a pretty big deal. Even if the guy is not a wrestler, that's still huge news. Jesse Ventura going to WCW, I found, pretty amazing as well. So now you had Jesse there, you had Bobby Heenan there, you had Mean Gene Okerlund there. Gene never had a problem with doing what was best for himself and doing what was best for his family. And he openly admits that he did everything for money. If you go back and listen to shoot interviews of his or any sort of interview where he talks about leaving the AWA for the WWE, he doesn't care. He doesn't feel the least bit bad about it because it's all about business. And he was entertaining in all three promotions. I mean, those were the three biggest ones, that the country has really ever seen. And he was, the main guy, the main lead announcer for all of them. And Mean Gene Okerlund never worked. He never called matches. He did a couple of times here and there in AWA and maybe even a couple of times in WWE, but that's not really what he was used for. He was the backstage interview guy. He was the pay-per-view report guy. My God, I loved watching those things back in the day in WWE. Every pay-per-view, for weeks prior to that, he would do a segment on TV on Superstars or Challenge or Primetime Wrestling or wherever, where he would run down the card. It would be filmed in the WWE production studio there. And those were just the days, man. That's what I remember. As a matter of fact, I have a whole folder of those type of pay-per-view reports. I probably go through and watch some of those tonight. But just watching him do that every week is such a huge part of my young life. And a lot of that is my childhood, just watching Mean Gene hype pay-per-views for us. He's the reason that a lot of us purchased those pay-per-views, telling us, hammering it into our heads to call our local cable company. We knew exactly what to do. Who can ever forget the hotline reports, too? Especially when he got to WCW. It was really funny, but he would run the hotlines in WWE. And then in WCW, remember, if you want to hear more, you're going to have to call the hotline, 1-900-909-9900, or whatever the number was. Get your parents' permission. It was $1.99 a call, and he would tease the shit out of you on Nitro and get you to call the hotline. And then when you called the hotline, he wouldn't really reveal any news. It was, the pre-internet days in wrestling were pretty crazy. And people spent a lot of money listening to his bullshit reports, and WWE even spoofed him in the Billionaire Ted skits, calling him Scheme Gene because of the ridiculousness of the hotline, when in reality, WWE was doing the exact same thing with him when he was in the company. So Gene was, he definitely left his mark, and he occupies a huge part of my wrestling memory, especially in the 80s and 90s, and he's going to be missed. I mean, it's sad as we get older and we start seeing a lot of these legends and a lot of these old-timers pass away. When you think back to a lot of those personalities from the 80s, you've got Andre the Giant gone, Bobby Heenan gone, Gorilla Monsoon gone, Mean Gene Okerlund gone, Last year we lost Bruno Sammartino. So many others. It's sad. It really is sad. But Mean Gene Okerlund, I will say this for the guy. He lived a full life, man. He lived a full, happy life. And like I said, he was unapologetic. He had his fun. He had his cocktails. And he had his vices. And hey, if you can do whatever you want and live life to the fullest and have a good time and make some money and drink and hang out and socialize with your friends and you die at 76, consider yourself lucky. Anytime after 75, I'm perfectly fine with cashing out. No reason to be around here till you're 100 years old. Mean Gene had a great life, a fun life. I tried to read up a little bit if there was any cause of death. I wasn't even aware that he was ill or sick, so I don't know what he died from. I don't know why he passed away, if this was a heart attack or, if he was sick and we didn't know about it. Don't know if he was in the hospital. I don't know if he died at home. Really don't know any details on his death at this point, but he was beloved by everybody, every wrestler that he interviewed, every fan that he met, every new wrestler that he had a chance to meet, because WWE was still bringing him in all the way up until this past year for the 25th anniversary Raw. I believe he was on the show. So Mean Gene is always around. He's always doing stuff with WWE. He's had a chance to meet a lot of the new talent and a lot of the new faces in WWE, and he's had a chance to meet a lot of fans, and he's always been super cool. I know there's plenty of you that are listening to this that have met the guy and taken pictures with him. Gene was always really accessible and really approachable and super, super nice, chill guy, but a real dude at the same time. Like I said, Gene was no pushover. Gene was no angel. He was exactly what he said he was, and I respected the hell out of the guy. And I'm going to miss him a lot. I've always missed him. I didn't like it when he left in 1993. I just felt this void. I was having a hard time as a fan adjusting to a non-Mean Gene WWE. It was just hard to transition from Mean Gene into Pettengill. You know what I mean? Mean Gene just has that voice, and he was a part of so many iconic moments in the business. His classic, post-match interviews. I remember the one with Andre the Giant after Andre the Giant won the WWE title from Hulk Hogan on NBC. And he jumped up on the ring apron to try to get an interview with Andre, and that's when Andre surrendered the title to Ted DiBiase. I remember his interview with Hulk Hogan right when he joined the NWO at Bash at the Beach, and he's in the ring with Hogan giving him shit. As long as I've known you, we've been friends for so long, and you're going to go out and do this. Look at all the crap in this ring. Just really giving it to Hogan and standing there right in the middle of that riot, right in the middle of that mob. And all of his moments with Ric Flair, most notably right after the Royal Rumble 1992 when Flair won the title, the "put that cigarette out" line. So, he was a part of some huge post-match interviews in wrestling, some of the biggest this business has ever seen. Mean Gene Okerlund was right there in the middle of it. And he could be serious when he wanted to. If he wanted to put something over in a serious way, he could do that. And if he wanted to be funny, he could do that too, especially if he was having an interview with Bobby the Brain Heenan and Bobby was spewing out nonsense and Mean Gene would call him out on it. Like I said, all of the hilarious interview botches that he was a part of, looking into the camera, laughing his ass off, because even though Gene was a rock, there was some things that he just couldn't hold in. And he had to deal with some really horrible promo skills by a lot of guys back in the day. That's why you needed guys like Gene. A lot of these guys may not have gotten over to the degree that they did. His long-running relationship with Hulk Hogan, dating all the way back to the AWA, and then following him into WWE in 1984, and he was synonymous with Hogan interviews. Mean Gene Okerlund even got in the ring one time. He teamed up with Hulk Hogan. I remember they even filmed training segments with the two of them, Hogan trying to get Mean Gene ready for the big match. They were a part of each other's lives for so long. AWA, WWE, then in WCW. Then Mean Gene is interviewing the evil Hulk Hogan when he joins the NWO. And then back in WWE, when Mean Gene would return after the buyout, he came back in to host the Confidential show on USA Network and would do some appearances for WWE from time to time. I was always really happy that he returned to the company, and he would still do interviews. I'm trying to think the last time we saw that, but I know there is something or an interview in recent memory where Mean Gene has been in the WWE ring on Raw interviewing Hulk Hogan in the past couple of years. So, they were together for 30 plus years in the business, and the two of them were, peanut butter and jelly it was really hard to watch a Hulk Hogan interview without Mean Gene. It seemed like Mean Gene should be there. And he was like that with a lot of guys. He had that chemistry with a lot of other legends as well, namely Ric Flair, with the way Flair would go, mean, woo, by God, Gene. I love that. He would dance around in his underwear. Ric Flair was hilarious. You can go back and watch any promo with the Macho Man where Mean Gene was doing the interview, and you'll be laughing your ass off. So many guys like that he had chemistry with. I loved it anytime he would, interview a manager like a Jimmy Hart or a Bobby Heenan. Like I said, Mean Gene was no pussy, and he would get right in their face and call them out on their bullshit and not be even in the slightest bit worried about the giant heel that's standing next to that manager that could kill him. He doesn't even care. He'd go ahead and just say what was on his mind, and that's what I loved about Mean Gene. He was like that on camera, and he was like that in real life. It's really sad to see Mean Gene go, but I do take comfort in knowing that there are countless amounts of memories that we all as wrestling fans can go back and take a look at. Like I said, I think tonight I'm just going to pull up a whole bunch of old school WWE pay-per-view reports from back in the day where Mean Gene would just run through the card. He was so good at doing that. I love that stuff, and it's one of my many great memories of Mean Gene Okerlund. So let's all toast one to Mean Gene tonight. I'm definitely going to have a cocktail, and I'll be toasting the life and career of Mean Gene Okerlund, because this is an incredibly sad loss, and for old school fans, this one hits us hard. This one hits us really hard. My thoughts and condolences go out to Mean Gene's family and his wife. I do believe his wife is still alive. Very difficult day for her, obviously. So hopefully we can all spend the rest of the day remembering Mean Gene and remember his great contributions to the wrestling business. And I am never, ever, as long as I live, going to forget that guy. Thank you very much for listening. I know things have been a little bit weird on the channel lately because of the Christmas and New Year holiday. The last couple of weeks of Monday Night Raw and SmackDown Live have been taped, and I have been working through both of those holidays, so I have not come up here and done any sort of a podcast review of those shows. I probably won't. I did my year-end big Q&A and year-end review show live on the 30th, last Sunday. The link is up in the top right if you want to take a look at that. And aside from this video, I probably won't come up here again until maybe this weekend for something quick. Otherwise, it'll be this coming Monday. I will be live streaming Monday Night Raw. And then next week, we will get back to our normal podcast schedule. And I know we have a lot to talk about with the Royal Rumble card shaping up and the announcement of All Elite Wrestling and the Double or Nothing pay-per-view coming up and all of that stuff. There's lots to get into, and I will talk about all of that in my next episode. So you guys take care of yourselves. Thanks so much for listening to this tribute to Mean Gene, and long live Gene Okerlund. I'll talk to you guys real soon. Peace.